Whittingdale, who has 3 minutes to answer the urgent question from Julian Knight. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Lord Dyson's report makes shocking reading. It details not just an appalling failure to uphold basic journalistic standards, but also an unwillingness to investigate complaints and to discover the truth. That these failures occurred at our national broadcaster is an even greater source of shame. The new leadership at the BBC deserves credit for setting up an independent inquiry and for accepting its findings in full. However, the reputation of the BBC, its most precious asset, has been badly tarnished, and it is right that the BBC board and wider leadership now consider urgently how confidence and trust in the corporation can be restored. It is not for the government to interfere in editorial decisions, but it is the job of government to ensure that there is a strong and robust system of governance at the BBC with effective external oversight. It was to deliver this that we made fundamental changes when the BBC's charter was renewed in 2015-16. Since then, the BBC Trust has been replaced by a more powerful board with an external regulator, Ofcom, responsible for overseeing the BBC's content and being the ultimate adjudicator of complaints. We also made provision at that time for a mid-term review by the government to ensure that the new governance arrangements are working effectively. That review is due next year, but work on it will start now. In particular, we will wish to be satisfied that the failures which have been identified could not have occurred if the new governance arrangements had been in place. The BBC board has also announced today its own review, led by the Senior Independent Director and 2 non-executive members of the BBC's Editorial Guidelines and Standards Committee. That review will examine editorial oversight, the robustness and independence of whistleblowing processes, and the wider culture within the BBC. It will take independent expert advice and will report by September. Mr. Speaker, in an era of fake news and disinformation, the need for public service broadcasting and trusted journalism has never been stronger. The BBC has been and should be a beacon, setting standards to which others can aspire. That it has fallen short so badly has damaged its reputation both here and across the world. The BBC now needs urgently to demonstrate that these failings have been addressed and that this can never happen again.
Let's go to the Chair of the Select Committee, Julian Knight. Julian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Lord Dyson's report was utterly damning. Put simply, Mr. Bashir obtained fame and fortune by instituting document forgery and callously scaring a mentally vulnerable woman. Not a mistake, as he claims in the Sunday Times, but something with more than the whiff of criminality about it. The BBC then covered this up, blackballing whistleblowers and ensuring its own reporters didn't report on Bashir. But it didn't stop there. The BBC rehired Bashir, who they know was a liar, promoted him, and extraordinarily for the BBC, allowed him to moonlight for their main commercial rival. Mr. Munro, head of news gathering, greeted Bashir's return by citing his excellent track record in enterprising journalism. My sources suggest, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Bashir wasn't interviewed, he was simply appointed. Hardly a highly competitive process. Does the Minister agree with me that Dyson leaves still more unanswered questions, such as who was precisely involved in the 25-year cover-up and instituted the action against whistleblowers? Was Bashir rehired in essence so that he would keep his mouth shut? Did Lord Hall actually make the decision to rehire, or was it in fact Mr. Munro? Finally, the BBC has announced a review into some of these matters and how robust its current practices are. But does the Minister agree with me that a good starting point will be to ensure the investigative panel is actually diverse, as yet no women are included? Ironic, considering the victim of Mr. Bashir was a woman. Shouldn't whistleblowers be compensated? And the matter of BBC culture need to be considered. The us and them between management and reporters, the kowtowing to so-called talent at the expense of the BBC's own editorial guidelines. And does he also share with me the alarm that Mr. Davey has recently removed the sole voice for editorial policy from the BBC's Executive Committee? And what does the Minister see as the long-term implications for the BBC's charter?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by thanking my honourable friend and congratulating him on his urgent question. He is maintaining the fine tradition of the CMS Select Committee asking probing and incisive questions. The questions he raises are indeed valid ones. On the particular point he makes about the process by which Martin Bashir was recruited to return to the BBC and his subsequent resignation only just a couple of weeks ago, these are matters which I know that the Director General is investigating urgently, and I would expect him to be providing a fuller account of exactly what happened very shortly. However, I know that my honourable friend will be wanting to examine the BBC on this question and indeed on the other very valid questions that he raises regarding the composition of the panel, its diversity and the protection in place for whistleblowing. These are important questions which need to be addressed, and my honourable friend in his select committee, I'm sure, will do so.
Let's go to the Shadow Secretary of State, Joe Stevens. Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to start by thanking the honourable member for Solihull for securing this urgent question and the Minister for his response. Secondly, I echo the many expressions of deep concern about the actions of Martin Bashir 25 years ago and the deception he used to secure the interview with Diana, Princess of Wales. The understandable hurt and pain expressed by Princes William and Harry has been deeply moving. The methods used by Mr Bashir were unethical and wrong, and clearly Mr Bashir should not have been re-employed by the BBC in 2016. The internal inquiry by the BBC into the interview was wholly inadequate. It was right that Lord Dyson conducted this inquiry, and his findings are stark. The fact that this interview was obtained 25 years ago does not minimise the damage that has been caused, and it's right that the BBC Director General has given an unequivocal apology. The onus is now on him to explain whether he considers that the changes to the governance of the BBC in those 25 years mean that something like this could not happen again. And I welcome the announcement of the review by the BBC board today, its terms of reference and the timescale in which it will report. But in amongst some of the commentary around the BBC we have heard over the past few days, we must remember that the BBC is bigger than just Martin Bashir. It is bigger than Panorama, bigger than other programmes, or even bigger than the Current Affairs Department. The BBC is one of the most trusted sources of news in the world, and at a time when trusted sources are more important than ever before. The Secretary of State said in his piece in the Times today that he would not be making a knee-jerk reaction to this incident, and I welcome that commitment. The new Director General and the Chair of the BBC, whose appointments were welcomed by the government, have been in post for less than a year. They need to be given time to make the reforms they have promised. The midterm review is an important chance to take stock, but we need to be clear exactly what problems any governance reforms will solve and keep the issue of funding of the BBC separate to its editorial control.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I express my thanks to the Honourable Lady. I agree with very much, almost indeed everything that she said. In terms of the governance of the BBC, as I said earlier, fundamental changes were made just a few years ago, which we believe would have meant that somebody who wished to blow the whistle in the way that took place would have been listened to, and they would have had recourse to Ofcom if they were dissatisfied with the BBC. But we do need to be absolutely sure that the new governance arrangements work properly, and there may well be need for further editorial oversight, and that is what the BBC's review is designed to reveal. However, I share her view about the importance of trust in the BBC. The midterm review will be carefully conducted. We will not rush into any changes. And finally, I can confirm to the Honourable Lady that the question of funding of the BBC is a separate one, and that the licence fee, whilst it will be subject to debate, I have no doubt, in the coming years, it is in place until the end of this charter in 2027.
Father of the House, Sir Peter Bottomley.
Can I say to my right honourable friend that he acted properly in 2015 when he appointed Sir David Clementi to review the BBC. The government were right to accept Sir David Clementi's recommendations, which came only a few months later, putting right the absurd arrangements made in 2007, which left the BBC without a chair and led to all kinds of confusion. May I say to my honourable friend that the BBC is a beacon, that things did go wrong, both by Martin Bashir and in the double reviewing of what he had done, and in his further reappointment back to the BBC. That's incontrovertible. But what should be also clear to the government is that if we start attacking the BBC, we will throw out much more than we've got. And if the choice is between the state broadcasting corporation, the BBC, or the United States, people in this country would rightly choose the BBC.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I must thank my honourable friend for his words. He's absolutely right that the previous governance arrangements were deeply flawed, and Sir David Clementi, who conducted the review and then went on to become chair of the BBC, put in place a much stronger governance system, both with a stronger internal management board and external oversight. And we do believe that would have been much more effective if it had been in place when some of the events we're debating had taken place. But I also absolutely agree with my honourable friend about the importance of the BBC. We have just heard about a statement from my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, about a country where public service broadcasting is not free or fair or independent. The BBC is a beacon of those things, and we are determined to strengthen it and to restore trust in it across the world.
Let's go to SNP spokesperson John Nicholson. John.
Mr. Speaker, the BBC has questions to answer about its cover culture. Why did Director General Tony Hall bring Martin Bashir only 5 years ago as religion correspondent, given that he knew he'd lied over the process used to secure the Princess Diana documentary? Who else was involved in the recruitment? Was Lord Hall warned that he'd be dismissed if Lord Dyson's conclusions were as critical of his behaviour as they were? What effect, if any, will Lord Hall's behaviour have on his retirement package? Why was Martin Bashir allowed to resign rather than be sacked? The treatment of Matt Weisler has been unforgivably cruel. Will the BBC now offer him an apology and financial settlement? Whistleblowers should never again be punished, as happened to those at Panama. Their careers were bloated under Lord Hall, asking uncomfortable questions. Regaining trust will now need to be a top priority. The BBC board should be strengthened with independently minded members with journalistic experience. The ongoing cover-up culture at the BBC is long-standing and must now be addressed.
Well, the honourable gentleman speaks with experience as a former employee of the BBC, and he raises extremely valid questions. As I say, the BBC is conducting an urgent investigation into the circumstances of the employment of Martin Bashir, but if there are questions that remain following that, I have no doubt that as a member of the Select Committee, the honourable gentleman will not be reticent in putting them to the BBC.
Now we go by video link to Sir William Cash.
Will my right honourable friend make clear that both the BBC and Ofcom must understand that following next year's midterm review, the government proposed to vary the charter and to make the guidelines, impartiality rules and complaints procedures subject to parliamentary approval without any so-called independent editorial standards board, which is the same old BBC dodge of waiting until things die down and then carrying on as before, which we witnessed after the Jimmy Savile affair in relation to whistleblowing, when they committed to deal with it and they didn't.
Well, I don't want to preempt either the BBC's review of editorial oversight or indeed the midterm review, which is only just we are only just beginning to work on. However, my right friend does make some extremely valid points. We did place impartiality in the first line of the BBC's public purposes at the time of charter renewal, and we will wish to be satisfied that the BBC is delivering that. But I know that that is something which both the new chair and the Director General take very seriously.
Thank you. Now we go by video link to Diane Abbott.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. All over the world, people are appalled by the dishonesty and cruelty of the way Martin Bashir secured his interview with a very vulnerable Princess Diana 25 years ago. And it is right that the BBC itself reviews its editorial practices and how Martin Bashir came to be employed again. But does the Minister appreciate that the BBC remains a very valued national institution, both here and overseas, and there is concern that long-standing enemies of the BBC are using the Bashir scandal to attack, defund and potentially dismantle our national broadcaster?
Well, I can absolutely assure the Honourable Lady there is no question of dismantling the BBC or defunding it. The BBC is a priceless national asset, and one of the most serious consequences of the revelations of the last week are that the reputation and trust in the BBC have been badly damaged. It is essential for the BBC to retain its position as the most trusted and reliable broadcaster in the world, and there is work to be done to restore that reputation.
Alan Cairns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The BBC has seen a string of recent public scandals, from Jimmy Savile to the treatment of Lord McAlpine and Sir Cliff Richard and many others. All have stemmed from a drive to secure sensationalist media headlines, along with groupthink and we-know-best approach. The BBC's capacity to scrutinise, investigate and to report on itself is in tatters, which is particularly worrying considering its huge resource, how it seeks to dominate the news space and its lack of transparency. Does my right honourable friend agree that reform is needed, not only in the specific areas that Lord Dyson has pointed to, but also into its culture, transparency and whether its dominance is undermining news plurality?
I do agree with my right honourable friend. He is entirely right that this is not a one-off incident. There have been dreadful failings by the BBC in their journalism in recent years, and he has mentioned three of them. I would say that all of those took place before the new charter was put in place. But we do need to assess the effectiveness of the Charter to ensure that it is properly working, and that is something that we are going to start work on, as I say, straight away.
Graham Stringer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. David Plowright, who was the Chair and Managing Director of Granada Television in its great days, used to say regularly that he needed the BBC to keep the commercial sector honest. If the BBC can't keep itself honest, we're in real trouble, aren't we? And does he agree with me that the changes at the BBC need to go beyond governance, structure and procedure and into a deep cultural change? And how would he go about supporting that change?
I very much agree with the honourable gentleman, and indeed my right honourable friend made the same point immediately before him. It is right that the BBC investigate the precise circumstances which led to Martin Bashir's interview and the subsequent failure to investigate properly the complaints, but it does go wider than that. It is a question of culture. We are determined that the BBC should be properly reflective of the diversity of sex, of race, of thought, of geography, and that in future the BBC is not just made up of people who pat themselves on the back and turn a blind eye when accusations are made. It is fundamental reform that is needed, but I'm also assured that that is something which is recognised by the new management and they are determined to address it.
Sir Edward Lee.
When are we going to have the guts to stop the BBC criminalising people for non-payment of a licence fee, which is no better than a poll tax?
Well, I do understand my right friend's strength of feeling. As he will know, we have now twice examined whether or not the licence fee should be decriminalised, or non-payment of a licence fee should be decriminalised. But it has revealed that if you do decriminalise, there is a risk that the alternative enforcement mechanisms actually lead to more distress for people who are perhaps not in a position to pay, with the possibility of bailiffs arriving and even greater fines. So we do need to look at this very carefully. As we have said, we have not ruled out decriminalisation, but we are balancing that against the consequences of the alternatives, and that is something which the government will continue to examine.
Now we go by video link to Jamie Stone.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as the House is aware, I am a Scottish politician. And during the 2014 Scottish independence referendum, the BBC came under very strong and sustained attack from the then First Minister, Mr. Alex Salmond, a gentleman who now broadcasts on Russian television and refuses to acknowledge the enormity of the crime that was committed in Salisbury. I wonder, does the Minister agree with me that in the long term, the editorial independence of the BBC and its protection from undue interference by politicians is paramount?
I do agree with the honourable gentleman. The independence of the BBC is absolutely central to its reputation for objectivity and reliability, and indeed it contrasts very strongly with the channel which he has also mentioned, RT, which has none of those things. We are absolutely committed to maintaining and indeed strengthening the independence and objectivity and fairness of the BBC.
Suzanne Webb.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my constituents in Stourbridge value the importance of public service broadcasting and a free press, as do I. Does my right honourable friend agree that the BBC, going forward, needs to improve its culture with a new emphasis on accuracy, impartiality and diversity of opinion to ensure that the failures highlighted by the Lord Dyson report never happen again?
I do agree with my honourable friend, because she is absolutely right that it is those qualities of accuracy and impartiality and fairness which are admired around the world as being represented by the BBC. And that is why the revelations in the Dyson report are so damaging, because it casts doubt on these things. And I can assure my honourable friend that not just the government, but I believe the BBC are absolutely conscious of that and are determined to put it right.
Kevin Brennan.
Deputy Speaker, can I welcome, in general, the tone that the Minister has adopted today in response to this? I think he said in his statement the need for public service broadcasting and journalism has never been stronger, and he's absolutely right about that. That was the conclusion of our Select Committee as well when we recently reported on the future of public service broadcasting. And this is an example of an era of journalism which was infected with a poisonous culture, which unfortunately, in this case, was spread to the BBC, which should have been displaying different kinds of values in its journalism. I just wanted to read a short quote from the National Union of Journalists Parliamentary Group, who said in their statement, it's important for us to reiterate that the BBC is not its management, past or present.
Coming to a question.
I am asking a question, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Pretty quickly, please.
With your indulgence, and I apologise, Madam Deputy Speaker, the BBC and the values and principles of public service broadcasting it personifies is in fact our members and all its staff who do the work that makes a corporation an entity that is valued at home and throughout the world. Does he agree with that statement?
I do agree with that statement. There is no question that the challenge that is posed by fake news and disinformation, which is circulating at a level we have never previously seen, makes it all the more important that there is trustworthy, reliable places where one can go without questioning the validity of what is being reported. And the BBC represents that above all else. I read with great interest the Select Committee report which he referred to, and in large part the government completely agrees it. And certainly about the importance of public service broadcasting, that has never been less, as was very powerfully set out by His Royal Highness Prince William in his own comments about this episode.
We now go by video link to Julie Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was very struck by Matty Syed's comment in the Sunday Times yesterday, referring to institutional narcissism in relation to the BBC. Whilst that might be slightly provocative, I wonder, does my right honourable friend believe that the current leadership of the BBC has a real sense of the cultural change that many people believe is necessary to retain trust in the BBC, particularly in news and current affairs, and indeed the capacity to achieve that change?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. I mean, there is no question that even before Lord Dyson's report was published, there was a widespread feeling that the culture within the BBC needed to change, that it was made up too much of people of the same mindset, of the same background, from the same part of the world, and that is something which I believe that the new leadership under the recently appointed Chair, Richard Sharp, and the Director General are aware of, and that they are intending to address.
Now we go by video link to Janet Davey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'm very grateful for this urgent question. The BBC board, as a response to the Lord Dyson report, has said it will review and assess the robustness of the independence of whistleblowing process. How important does the Minister consider independence in whistleblowing, including the protection of whistleblowers?
I would say to the Honourable Lady, I regard it as absolutely essential, not just in the BBC, but in all public bodies. But what we need to make sure is that in future, if somebody blows the whistle and exposes malpractice in the BBC, the consequence is that somebody else gets fired and not that they do.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Would my right honourable friend agree that part of the problem in the culture of the BBC is a confusion that people in the BBC very often confuse threats to confuse accountability, the need to be accountable, with some threat to the independence of their editorial judgment, and therefore they avoid that accountability. Does the board now accept, in his view, that until there is a permanent and independent body, completely independent body, overseeing editorial policy, complaints procedures, whistleblowing, like a kind of accident investigation body, that we're not going to see that change of culture, because they will go back to their established custom, which is to deny accountability?
Minister.
Well, I think my honourable friend is right that we do need to see a much stronger oversight of the editorial decision-making process in the BBC. The BBC board covers a vast range of different aspects of the BBC's activities, its strategy, its budget, etc. And I think there is a case for greater oversight, particularly of journalistic decisions and editorial decisions. Quite how that is brought about is something which the review which the BBC have put in place is examining urgently, and I understand that review will be producing a published report by September, and we will obviously want to look at that very carefully.
Hannah Bardell.
Madam Deputy Speaker, trust is the foundation of the BBC. So say its values, except if you're trying to cover up a serial sex offender scandal like Jimmy Savile, or do over a respected journalist like Carrie Gracie, or lie and cheat to get your exclusive interview with the Princess. As Lord Dyson's report states, the investigation conducted by Lord Hall was flawed and woefully ineffective. And to add insult, a 2018 report found Scottish fee payers subsidised broadcasting in the rest of the UK by £100 million a year. So isn't it about time that Scotland stopped having to subsidise such ineptitude by those at the top of the BBC, and his government acted to ensure everyone in the UK is fairly treated and represented by the BBC?
Well, the BBC is the British Broadcasting Corporation. It reports on activities across the United Kingdom. It is paid for by every person resident within the United Kingdom who has a television, and impartiality and fairness applies as much in their reporting of domestic politics as it does internationally. There are questions to be answered, as I agreed earlier with, and the Honourable Lady is correct. However, I do believe that the British Broadcasting Corporation should remain a beacon of impartiality for all residents of the United Kingdom.
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I just take my right honourable friend back to the one bit of the Dyson report which has left a serious question, and that is to do with the behaviour of the then chairman and also Mr Bashir. The definition of fraud is a deception intended to result in financial or personal gain by false representation. There is no question within this report that Mr Bashir made false representation to prey on a vulnerable woman to get and do something which he would otherwise not have done. And furthermore, he also refers to, but does not conclude anything, that Mr Hall and others therefore covered up that process, which I think opens them up again to the idea of fraud. So I wonder if my right honourable friend has actually decided to refer those people to the Director of Public Prosecutions.
Well, I mean, the questions surrounding the employment of Martin Bashir, as I've said, are being urgently investigated by the corporation, and I expect a statement to be made very shortly. In terms of whether or not any criminal offences have been committed, I understand that a request has gone to the Metropolitan Police to examine the evidence that has been revealed and to reach a judgment on that, and it is a matter for the police to determine.
Damien Green.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's clear that shameful journalistic practices took place and that the investigations into them were, at best, profoundly inadequate. But does my right honourable friend agree not only that the BBC needs to clean up its act in quite a considerable way, but also that this lamentable episode should not be used as an excuse to severely damage or destroy an institution which is hugely valued by tens of millions of people in this country and millions more around the world?
Yeah. Well, I entirely share my right honourable friend's admiration for the BBC, which at its best is the finest broadcaster in the world. It is that which makes these revelations so painful, that an institution that we all admire should be found to be capable of such appalling failings. But absolutely, I agree with my right honourable friend. Our intention here is to restore the trust in the BBC and certainly not to in any way diminish it as one of our great national assets.
We now go by video link to Steve McCabe.
Thank you. I'm sure that many people will have been disgusted by the behaviour of Martin Bashir and those senior figures who failed to address his actions, Madam Deputy Speaker. But does the Secretary of State agree that for demands for the present government to act against today's BBC over events that occurred more than a quarter of a century ago could look a little ridiculous?
Well, I'm sure I will be speaking for the Secretary of State in saying that it is not a question of punishing the BBC, particularly for, as he says, for events which happened a long time ago, but it is absolutely essential that we learn the lessons of what did happen then. As I said, we have already put in place significant changes since those episodes occurred, but we do need to be absolutely certain that the current government arrangements are effective and that these appalling incidents could not have happened if they had been in place.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now then, the findings of the Dyson report come as no surprise to many residents in Ashfield who have lost all confidence in the BBC. And I personally have ripped up my TV licence and they won't get another penny from me ever. Because in my opinion, the once great BBC is rotten and my constituents should not have to pay for a service if they don't use it. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that one way to make the BBC behave in the future is to make it a subscription service?
Well, I would say to my honourable friend that I think he is absolutely right that one of the great challenges the BBC faces is to reconnect with the people that he represents. I think there is a widespread feeling that the BBC is too metropolitan-centred and that it has lost touch with the views of a large part of the British population. That is something which I think the BBC themselves recognise. With regard to subscription, as I said earlier, the licence fee is in place till 2027, when the current charter expires, but obviously there is bound to be a debate about the future funding. It would require quite significant changes to the way in which people receive their television to move to a fully subscription model, but nevertheless I have no doubt that that is a debate which has already started and will continue.
Now we go by video link to Neil Hanvey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. At its heart, the Dyson report speaks to the missing values of integrity, honesty and the value of truth at the BBC. Following the biased coverage of the 2014 independence referendum, this crisis in trust is but a taste of what audiences in Scotland have known for years. The BBC brand is broken in Scotland and broadcasting must therefore be devolved, or at the very least the introduction of a new funding model where all money raised in Scotland is spent in Scotland. Many will be bewildered by today's hand-wringing over integrity and impartiality when the broadcaster that sees no issue in giving space to the Scottish leader of UKIP in 2016, but yet refused any place for my party at the 2021 debates, despite being led by a former First Minister, 2 sitting MPs and numerous councillors across Scotland. Why is the UK government so quick to act when public trust has been broken now, but has been silent on the collapse in trust amongst viewers in Scotland for years? As a net contributor to the BBC with a £3 million annual shortfall between income and spending in Scotland, how does the UK government plan to plug the hole left, propping up programming elsewhere upon Scotland's independence?
Well, the BBC is committed to impartiality in its coverage of all political events, including the referendum in Scotland and the current political debate. And it is very important that the independence of the BBC is defended and that it resists political pressure from parties in Scotland, be it the SNP or indeed some new offshoot from them.
Now we go by video link to Sarah Britcliffe.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With the midpoint review of the BBC Charter imminent, does the Minister agree with many of my constituents across Harman and Haslingden that everything must be on the table for discussion, including its governance structures? And can the Minister clarify the scope of any future inquiries will cover the wider culture at the BBC?
Well, the mid-term review is about the governance of the BBC and the new arrangements which were put in place, and it will certainly incorporate a consideration of the culture to ensure that the BBC in its present form is delivering on its public purposes. It is a mid-term review of the existing charter. There will, of course, be an opportunity for a more fundamental examination of every aspect of the BBC, including its funding, when we come to the renewal of the Charter, but that is still not until 2027.
Now we go by video link to Tahir Ali.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can the Minister explain which elements of the BBC's governance structure he thinks needs to be reviewed in light of Lord Dyson's report? And does the Minister agree that in considering the Dyson report, we should all remember the BBC's contribution to the UK's economy, culture, democracy and soft power abroad?
Well, as I said, the government very much hopes that the new governance arrangements that are in place now are sufficient, but the purpose of the mid-term review is to assess that and see whether any further changes need to be made. With regard to the contribution of the BBC, both to the economy of this country and to democratic debate, I entirely share the honourable gentleman's view that the BBC plays a central part in both.
Richard Drax.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I must declare an interest. I worked for BBC South Today and BBC Radio Solent for 9 very happy years, where I witnessed the highest standards and was never influenced, ever, on how I was to report other than fair, fairly, balanced and accurately. It seems to me the problem is at the national level with senior management. Can my right honourable friend ask or tell the House how to ensure that senior management at the top of the BBC is in the future independent and meets all the very high standards that we want them to meet?
Well, I'd say to my honourable friend, and I'm pleased to hear what he says about the high standards which pertained when he was working for the BBC, and obviously that is something which we hope will represent the BBC's values in the future. In terms of the leadership and management, the review which has been conducted by the BBC into the specific lessons to be learnt from Lord Dyson's report will actually feed into the wider reform agenda, which I think that the board are determined to pursue. And there is no question that there is a problem with the culture of the BBC, which goes beyond just the failings that have been identified by Lord Dyson. And I can assure my honourable friend that that is something which the leadership of the BBC does now recognise and is working hard to address.
Tanmanjeet Singh Desi.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The hurt and anger felt by Princess William, Harry and other members of the royal family is palpable and painful, and I'm so glad that there has been an unequivocal apology from the BBC and the launch of the Lessons Learnt report on account of the diabolical journalistic practices endured by Princess Diana in 1995. But of course, the BBC is so much more than a single programme. It is a treasured institution which has contributed immensely to our nation over the last century. So would the Minister agree that it's very distasteful to see a feeding frenzy, especially from those with a severe dislike of the BBC? And does he also agree that it's the pinnacle of irony for the Prime Minister to be talking about being immensely concerned about journalism standards, given that he himself was sacked by the Times for inventing a quote?
Well, the honourable gentleman was doing fine until the end. This is a more serious matter. I would agree with him certainly about the distress that has been caused to the royal family, which has been very powerfully expressed by His Royal Highness Prince William. That is something which the BBC, I think, recognises, which is why they are acting to address it. And I can only repeat what I've said already. The trust in the BBC is one of its greatest assets, and the BBC has now got to work hard to restore that.
Now we go by video link to John Redwood.
How can someone who supports Brexit, believes in the Union and loves England be persuaded that the BBC's view of public service broadcasting will in future be fair to their views? Will in future the BBC allow the majority on these issues more voice and less denigration?
Well, I can answer my honourable friend by saying that I am one of the people he has described precisely in all three of those particular measures. And I too have occasionally been concerned at what appeared to be a lack of impartiality in the BBC on some of those issues. And that is something which has been, I think, felt by a large number of people, and it is the job of the BBC, as I say, it is the first public purpose of the BBC to deliver impartiality, and I know that that is something that the management, the leadership of the BBC, which is now in place, is absolutely committed to, but they will be examining ways in which that can be strengthened where necessary.
Thank you. Now we go by video link to Martin Day.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. While ministers toy with taking greater personal control of the BBC, true democratic reform remains out of reach. So rather than stifling journalistic freedom, will the minister consider devolving broadcasting powers to the devolved nations to ensure democratic local regulation of BBC services?
Well, I would say to the honourable gentleman, firstly, that the government has no intention of imposing greater control over the leadership of the BBC. The BBC is independent, and we are committed to respecting and strengthening that independence. And when it comes to the question of governmental responsibility, it is not a devolved matter. The BBC is a national broadcaster covering the whole of the United Kingdom, and therefore we believe that it is right that it remains the responsibility of the UK government as a whole.
Hugh Merriman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I chair the all-party parliamentary group for the BBC, and I say in that regard this has not been a good chapter for the BBC's fine history, and it's important that they learn the lessons. Can I just say to the Minister, I welcome his tone, very balanced tone. No one has done more in this place to try and reform the BBC and move them to that better place. Can I ask him just to describe a little more about the review process that will apply the conditions that exist now with regard to governance versus what would have occurred beforehand? Who will perform that role? Will it be his department, his officials, or will he bring somebody in to assist in that regard?
Minister.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. I mean, as he knows, the mid-term review was not actually due to take place until next year. It is written into the Charter, but it should be in 2022. We would almost certainly have begun to start work about thinking about the issues to be considered, about the questions needing to be addressed in any case. But this has, I think, made that more urgent, and the Secretary of State has made clear that we are starting work on it now. Precisely how the mid-term review will operate and whether or not we invite external submissions is not yet determined. But I will certainly try to ensure that he is the first to know when we have further announcements to make.
And finally, we go by video link to Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Some have sought to defend the BBC by saying the disgraceful Martin Bashir incident was 25 years ago, and indeed it was. But since 1995, we have had the cover-up of Jimmy Savile. We have had the disgraceful incident regarding the surveillance of the search of the Cliff Richard home. We have had the political partisanship of Emily Maitlis on Newsnight. And recently, in the past week or so, we've just heard about a Palestinian expert on the BBC who, before she was employed by the BBC, tweeted, "Israel is more Nazi than Hitler." The mid-term review surely offers the opportunity for radical, fundamental change at the BBC.
Well, I'd say to the honourable gentleman, a lot of the incidents he has mentioned did take place before the new governance arrangements were in place, but obviously we need to consider whether there are lessons to be learned from these incidents for our mid-term review. In relation to the specific issue he raises around the journalist and tweets regarding Israel and Palestine, I would have to say that if it is shown that those tweets were genuine, then in my view, anybody who can express such opinions should not be employed by the BBC.
Thank you.